and available after. And we will be distributing this recording after the webinar. As well, we will have a question and answer period today. Feel free to use the Q&A function in Zoom throughout, and at the end, we will try and get to as many questions as we can with answers. But anyways, let's get started. Happy to be joined by Roger, Hill, and Yair Attar today. Going to be a great conversation, but as we get started, if I can have you gentlemen introduce yourselves. I'll start with Roger, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. So my name is Roger Hill. I am kind of an old timer to OT security long before we actually had the name OT. So I have a long background, probably 30 years in the industrial control system space within a lot of different verticals. About 16 years of that was within Siemens, where I had different roles of systems engineering, applications engineering, and actually led the build out of the industrial control system cybersecurity services post Stuxnet. Then I had a little stint at what I jokingly call my midlife crisis, doing a tech startup in my 30s where I built out a software-defined networking platform, working with the Department of Energy. And then I went back to the automation world with Rockwell, leading the product security side, and then building up the global business for OT security at Kudelski Security. So here I am, at it again, founded my own company, and we have a very interesting group that's really dedicated towards OT security. So looking forward to today's conversation. Thanks, Dave.
Great, thanks, Roger. And Yair.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Hi, everyone. Yair Attar, CTO and co-founder of OTORIO. About 6.5 years already. Prior to that, a bit more than a decade within the Israeli Defense Forces, various positions from software engineering to architecture to security architecture. I had the pleasure of leading Israel nation-state incident response and threat hunting teams. Usually I say I'm on Israel, we're a small country with a lot of attention, I would say, towards us. I also had a pleasure of working and partnering with Roger in different areas and milestones throughout our joint journey in the past few years, from Rockwell to Kudelski and now. So that's always been a pleasure. And that's briefly about myself.
Thanks, Yair. Well, it will be a great discussion today. Lots of experience around the table, so looking forward to it. So let's dig in. So I think to start our discussion, really want to frame some of the key challenges when that we face when securing OT environments. So in terms of challenges, what are you seeing in the OT cyber domain? And maybe go to Roger first.
I think first and foremost is probably the whole vulnerability management problem for OT. And this is where, I think the contrasting differences between IT and OT are really quite glaring. There's really 3 different categories, the way I think about it, in terms of OT vulnerabilities. The first one is really the OS category, the Microsoft patches, or the OT-based, PC-based systems that are hosting things such as SCADA, MES, engineering workstations. The secondary to that, though, is the applications themselves, the actual SCADA applications. That's where you will have some patch qualifications by the automation vendors themselves. The challenge, though, is they don't have the context of the application that was designed and developed. And then finally, the most challenging class or category is really the embedded side, the real-time operating system. This is the PLCs, the VFD drives, things of this nature. And this is where the focus is much more around understanding what is your risk within the OT systems, understanding the scope, but it's not just looking at the CVSS score, if you will. It's understanding what is your risk given the controls you have in place within your OT environment. The focus is all about mitigation of risk, not necessarily about patching. Patching is not something that is necessarily a good idea at times, depending upon the class. But that's a topic for a whole nother webinar, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yair, what's your perspective on this question?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from like working and discussing with dozens of large enterprises globally that we are working with, I would say that the main questions, pain points, challenges we're seeing that everyone are almost always addressing or raising to manage the growing complexity of the, I would say, attack surface of OT environments is first really a very basic question that I think a lot of organizations are already somewhere in the journey of covering that, which like how to gain proper visibility into those networks, understanding what you have, which type of vendors, solutions, because at the end of the day, you won't be able to understand what type of vulnerabilities and gaps you have if you don't have this proper visibility. The second question is, where do I focus, right? What do I do from here? We're sometimes seeing a lot of organizations that have some visibility, and then they have a very big list of items they need to do. We all know that they can not go and fix everything. Even in the IT realm, that's quite challenging. So where do they focus? How do they prioritize? And the last question is what to do with those findings, right? As Roger mentioned, it's not that easy to go and patch or update. We've seen use cases. I remember one energy customer that approached Siemens, and Siemens basically provided a full quote for changing the whole automation stack because of one specific vulnerable asset. This doesn't make any sense. So what to do with those findings? Maybe there are some investments that could be leveraged. Now, I also want to address another thing related to those challenges that I think that there is sometimes some obsession to CVEs, but at the end of the day, let's be honest, there's some basic hygiene that is missing. I can say that this is almost unanimously. We're always seeing, I don't know, very basic things from default credentials, SMB version 1 open, you know, different types of very basic configurations that are just not properly configured in OT environments. And attackers are just human beings like all of us. They will try to do the easiest things they can do while creating an impact. There's no reason for someone to break a lock on a window if the door is open. So I think those are some of the key challenges, and really resonates with what Roger said, right? How do you deal with those vulnerabilities and gaps without being able to have the flexibility to touch and patch assets? How do you do more with past investments? I think those are key challenges we're seeing today within the market when we are talking to many organizations.
Yeah, I think we see this, you know, there's this challenge, but opportunity to really try and get the fundamentals right. But what I'm hearing is, you know, context is important. And I think as we approach OT, there's not a one size fit all or standardized process that maybe does, you know, is more prevalent in IT, right? But that, you know, each facility can be different, even within an organization, right? So I think it provides some unique challenges. Now, Roger, how have you seen the dynamic over the years change, or what's your perspective on IT and OT collaboration? Kind of related to this topic.
Yeah, so it's definitely changed. I remember back in the old days working with the automation vendors where it was you know, Siemens, for example, building embedded PCs that would actually sit on the DIN rail rack right next to a PLC. You'd have DVI ports, and you know, it was a full-fledged PC that could run an embedded OS for some specific functionality. But you know, the message to the IT guys is, see, this is a DIN rail. These are the droids you're looking for, just to have a, you know, Star Wars reference here. But you know, that was the culture, and that's the reason I bring up that story is the automation vendors were really approaching that bottoms up, working with the controls engineers and process engineers. That was the world. It was that industrial DIN rail mounted world. I think that has definitely changed. I think fast forward to today, in terms of who predominantly has the budget and responsibility of securing operational technology today, depending on what survey you're looking at, you're well over 70%. It's the CISO now. So I think that's kind of interesting, and that has really brought together this bridge, or this necessary bridge, between IT and OT. And absolutely the most effective approaches that I've seen, because there's a talent skills gap that exists within the market, right? And I think we all know that. But one of the really great things that you can do organically within an organization is by building cross-functional teams. It's absolutely crucial to have different domains of discipline from both the IT and the OT side as a cross-functional team, so that you're evolving that mindset and learning within that cross-functional team and creating those resources that you need. So I think that is starting to kind of foster much more of a bridge between those worlds. But listen, those worlds are still completely very different. But I think there's a better understanding from both sides now.
Yeah, let me even jump in and give a small example from a multinational manufacturer. That was really interesting. They tried to tackle the cybersecurity for the production shops in a governance and centralized perspective. And the CIO gave the IT CISO basically the responsibility, and tasked him with the basically go and push this within the organization. And after a few months, he completely failed. Then what the CIO did, something I think very, very smart, he took someone very, very strong that people really like, and also I would say someone who's really agile from technology perspective, who's pushing innovation from one of the manufacturing sites, to take this role as a global leader under the CIO. And all of a sudden, all the pushbacks, all the comments and feedbacks, why it cannot work because you cannot understand what we're doing here, and it disappeared completely. And since then, what was really interesting and valuable to see, how this guy was able to create and build this bridge between IT and OT, and start creating this collaboration, committees, and pushing all they wanted to do from a governance perspective into the sites. So just again, one example, very interesting one, of how they tackled this challenge of collaboration with taking the different personas from the different worlds, in changing the roles to some extent, and helping push this forward.
Yeah, that's great. And that really speaks to having an intentional strategy, right? And really trying to ensure that OT security is a priority, and it needs investment, and it needs strategy, but it also needs the people and process to be aligned, right? So, as we look at what steps companies can take, what are some of the fundamental components of a robust OT security strategy? And are there ways for the organizations to properly align their OT security strategies with broader business objectives? Do you think that's feasible? I mean, I might go to Yair for this one first.
I think first we need to understand that the whole environment is changing. Meaning, I think that, from traditional Purdue model concepts, from a networking perspective, even before cybersecurity, things are changing, becoming more connected, cloud, AI. And I think those things should be endorsed and not blocked. I think that we cannot fight digitalization. At the end of the day, cybersecurity, specifically to those environments, needs to be seen as enabler. And this is the mind, I think, that the change of mind that needs to happen, and how I would say cybersecurity needs to advocate when we're talking about those environments. Now, additionally, one additional trend we're seeing in the market, that a lot of organizations are now moving to, let me call it a left of boom trend, So from reactive to proactive, from detection to protection, right? I think Gartner, by the way, is really pushing this now strongly, everything related to exposure management, like connecting all the dots from vulnerabilities, context, security controls, effectiveness. Because at the end of the day, it's important to show metrics that you can measure for success that will help you internally to show how taking actions that you just did are helping to protect the environment better. I mean, it's hard. We all know how cybersecurity and getting budgets, it's a challenging topic. It's usually being seen as a cost center. And I think that this is where collaboration through partnerships with the business owners, awareness, education needs to happen, that those business owners will understand what it means, and they will actually come and say, I need cybersecurity. I want cybersecurity. I want to enable this in a safe and secure manner. I think this is what we're seeing from the ones that are more successful getting more budgets. Let's get this as a digitalized journey, but we want to make sure that this is a safe and secure journey, compared to sometimes that it's hard for internal people to justify the cost of investments in those environments.
There's a couple of really interesting points that you hit on there, Yair, that hopefully I can remember to connect all those dots, because my caffeinated brain was just jumping all over the place there. So I think it's really interesting just to kind of think back a little bit in time to those early days. And I almost think of OT security as having gone through these major evolutionary cycles, right? So there was the very early stage was the raising awareness of why we need to be paying attention to OT security. Then we kind of went through this shiny object syndrome on the technology side, no offense, right? Where it was there's much more focus about getting technology to gain that visibility, which is very necessary. Understand what you have to know how to protect it, right? To getting to that point of, okay, now what can we do with this technology? You know, how do we build a program? I think where we are now is, I think the board and senior leadership are looking at investments that have been made within the space, and they're asking about that return of the investment, right? How are we measuring progress? How are we measuring success? And that's where I would say that my crystal ball for the next 12 to 18 months is going to be much more focused on really building out OT governance programs, OT compliance, measuring what are the metrics we're using to measuring success, because it is about people, process, and technologies. And I totally agree with you that there's, with all the digitalization initiatives, whether we're looking at Industry 4.0 or other type of initiatives, it's not that, and I absolutely, you know me, I hate that name of air gapped. I've never seen one. So, the interconnections between the concrete meets the carpet have been there ever since I've been in this space, right? We were doing web integration back in the 90s. So the integration has been there. What's happening now with the digitalization initiatives is it's literally an explosion of different, really from a security perspective, attack vectors, right? It's an arms race to get that high fidelity data up to the cloud to realize additional business value. And that's creating some challenges within our space and some of the constraints that you're seeing, for example, on the classic Purdue model. So I think there's a lot of interesting points there, but hopefully I hit on some of the topics you mentioned. But I think this is definitely an interesting time, and it's much more about how are we going to measure a program. And I think you kind of hit on something, Dave. It's not just the strategy and creating that business case for the OT security program, but how are we prioritizing those initiatives, right? What is the methodology there? One of the things I personally like to use there is to look at a given initiative as a group of course, the tasks that we're going to be addressing, and making some estimation of what is the cost to implement that program, what is the impact on my security program, and what is the time involved. And by taking this type of a weighted metrics-based approach, I can at least start to force rank what those initiatives are. And then based upon my appetite, that dictates how aggressive, and of course, what my budgets are. So I think that's one way to address the prioritization of your strategic plans.
I think that brings up a very important point is we talk a lot about what we need to do in this space. What do we need to do to secure our most critical environments? But oftentimes we don't find the budgets in that conversation, and it's a reality. And so many times the conversation is starting before we get to budget. Now there's sort of a horse and cart there. But Yair, I don't know any strategies for how to ensure that the appropriate budget and resources are available and that there's this alignment in an organization. What have you seen that's worked well for organizations?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, organization needs to first decide that this is a topic they want to invest. Otherwise, it's going to be something very, very challenging to try and convince. Yes, I think that us, the experts, need to advocate, need to explain, need to create awareness, need to educate, so more people will understand the potential, what it means. Because think about it, right? I think lots of organizations are investing a lot in IT cybersecurity, but at the end of the day, the companies we are talking to right now, the OT space, this is their main revenue stream. This is their core business. Now, again, I'm not saying, nobody says it needs to be perfect, but I think this needs to be basically on the discussion. This needs to be something that management is aware. Definitely, we're seeing, regulations and standards and different type of threats happening out there that create more awareness, and this will take time. But also something to emphasize. So again, just to answer your question, I think that there's no magic answer for how do you get a budget, right? For any type of project in OT cybersecurity. I think it's really how do you define your key mission metrics, what exactly you want to measure against, and also what are your KPIs in this journey to show success? And I saw that there was a question here, and probably we're going to address it a bit later. Like what type of measures can we take? But at the end of the day, I think once you come with a plan that shows on one hand value, that shows this as an enablement, that shows also what's happening in the market, the trends, and explain what you're going to do with the investment and what type of value it will bring, this is definitely probably the way forward. And one last thing, we also need to remember as cybersecurity experts that we need to maintain balance of seeing the full picture also of total cost of ownership. I've seen many organizations that were struggling with the decision of, on one hand, you want to invest on cybersecurity. On the other hand, as long as you start to invest more and more and more, the whole total cost of ownership just becomes bigger. It's not just the tools, technologies, people, trainings, etc. It's the ongoing operational management, maintenance, and things like that that you need to take into consideration. So I think organizations always need to balance that, measure that, making sure that they're doing it in steps. This is a journey. It's not a let's put everything all together and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Sorry, Dave, just jump in real quick because I think that's really interesting. I think when you look at operational security, the way I tend to think of this, Yair, is it's really the cost of doing business in today's world. It's the cost of quality. It's the cost of safety. These are not foreign concepts to producing products in an industrial automation or cyber physical system. This is, we've been focusing on quality and safety for a while, and safety has a lot of parallels with operational security, and it's just the new normal, if you will, and it's just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think that balance is really important because, you know, we can talk all we want about, well, we got Windows XP running this production line, but oftentimes it's the cascading effect that if we want to replace the Windows XP computer, it also means replacing a good portion of the production line. And now we're into, you know, 7 figures instead of what seems to be a, you know, $1,500 expense. But and I also think there's a great opportunity through all of this, reminding, you know, even if we look at NIST and things like that, it speaks to extending security from the mission, vision, and values of the organization. And I think the more we do that, the more it becomes real and whatnot. But beyond that, Roger, you know, as you know, we look to kind of close and address one of the questions that came in. What are some very tangible kind of metrics or KPIs? You know, what can we establish for OT security? How do we approach that? You know, as people go for budget or to go, you know, show the value, how should we be tracking that?
Yeah, I think metrics is a really interesting one in terms of, so maybe for the OT vulnerability management program, this is much more about building out the processes and the technology that would enable those processes, right? So I think when you're looking at some of the specific metrics that you can measure for that OT vulnerability management program, it's the time to mitigation could be one metric, because we have to think in terms of the process of identification, triage, and then that mitigation. And notice I'm saying mitigation, not necessarily remediation or patching. You know, because I think it's, you know, the one thing I want to touch on is you mentioned the mission, and think about my friends over at NIST that created the NIST IR 8183, the manufacturing profile. One of the things that I think they did so well was really starting to state what is the mission, right? So when you think about it from an operational perspective, it's about maintaining your product quality, maintaining your product availability, maintaining your human safety, environmental safety, and then the information as it pertains to that cyber physical system and automating that system. And that anything we're going to do from a security perspective will align to either one of those pillars or multiple pillars. If it doesn't, we shouldn't be doing it. So when we're defining our metrics also have to be aligned with the mission.
Yair,
What do you
any
think?
additional perspective? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that first of all, we need to remember that when we're talking about this domain, it's like it's not just technology, it's really people and processes as well, meaning we need to measure those as well from the roles and responsibilities, from workflows, from processes, from training perspective. And I think maybe one key element is don't try to be perfect. It's not easy to show return of investment in cybersecurity. So choose metrics that highlight success, that of course are valuable, but can help you internally to show success and grow the project and grow the program. I think things like, and my perspective would be try to adopt risk-based approach, right? Because not all assets are born equal, especially in OT. Understanding the context, understanding the potential impact. And I've seen different types of KPIs from different organizations. You know, it could be on visibility coverage. It can be things, as Roger mentioned, from vulnerabilities, KPIs and performance around that. It could be also things related to security controls effectiveness, like segmentations from zones and conduits perspective. I don't know, things like even basic things like how do you know that on each and every endpoint in the shop floor, you have the latest EDR installed, agent running, just from a coverage perspective, right? So different types of those things. Could be sometimes I've seen organizations that are having different types of policies. Even, by the way, as we know, that it's really hard to create like one governance and standard on those in those environments. But even pushing policies for generation type of technologies. So meaning every now new equipment that comes in needs to be on a specific policy, from very tactical things like, I don't know, secured logon and things like that, to more architectural things. One last thing that I think from a KPI perspective that I saw a lot of management, I would say, like this, is really performance management. Things, as Roger mentioned, right? Risk resolution time, the team effectiveness, showing that it's not just, okay, we now know what we have, but that we're actually taking actions based on that and measuring our effectiveness. Are we touching the highest risks and things like that? I think that one of the things that I really liked recently, I had a discussion with a CISO of one of the largest automotive OEMs, and he looked at it like this. He said, what I want to see in my eyes when talking to my management is, let's say, I don't know, I have risk at specific level, let's say 80%. That is based on different KPIs, like number of vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, etc. Then I want to see my residual risk. How much my risk has gone down due to my existing controls, because I've invested in firewalls, I've invested in EDRs, I've invested in different controls. So how it's all connected, and based on that, where I'm at, and what's going to be my next quarter or half a year action items that I'm going to get to my accepted risk. Of course, it's being driven by a lot of more tactical KPIs, but this is in a nutshell, I would say, a risk-based approach.
You know, I think that's interesting. You mentioned the technical KPIs, and I think that's the context of how I first answered your question, Dave. But I think there's something else too. Working with a lot of global manufacturers that, you know, have 100 manufacturing sites globally, you know, you have a big challenge, right? It's one thing to state what your program is, to state what your control system cybersecurity requirements are. The one measurement, though, isn't necessarily just the technical, but how is my adoption within my fleet of sites, right? And all my sites aren't created equal, right? They might be different tiers of criticality to the business. So I think there's another form of measurement that is very important to the board and leadership, and that's the adoption or compliance to our OT security program. How well are we doing as a program, right? So I think it's not just the technical measurement, but it's really that, and again, going back to that internal OT compliance, how are we measuring success?
I think we've seen that, you know, the maturity and even in compliance frameworks and whatnot, with NIST adding in this whole governance element, or about to add in,
Yeah.
right? So very, very important and great advice for sure. But anyways, we do have some time for Q&A, and we have a few questions that have come in. So you know, I'm going to go ahead and maybe ask some of these additional questions, because this has been a great chat, and you know, so much we could talk about, and we could go on for quite a long time on these topics. But question coming in here: what are ways to gain ways or tools to gain real-time visibility to OT environments? Maybe I'll go to Yair first.
Yeah, so first of all, I think today there are many vendors. I mean, we're one of them, of course. You can always reach out to us. But I think, and not trying to advocate our technology, I think at the end of the day, there are many tools, and each organization needs to identify, again, what's important for them when they are evaluating and measuring what potential tools can help them with what they're trying to accomplish. Because there are many tools out there. I think every vendor's gone to a specific way or focus or area. So there's no one fit all. Definitely not. But I think that there are many tools that can address that. Of course, again, we ourselves can help as well. But I think that first, organization needs to define to himself what exactly they're trying to achieve, what type of environments, and based on that, identify what type of vendors can support them in this journey. And one last thing, maybe it's not just technology, as I mentioned before. This is anyway, no matter what type of technology you're going to choose, this is going to be a journey internally of education, of additional buying of site managers and OT folks, and it's a process. And you need to find the right partner for this journey. So it's not just looking for the right technology, because that's great, but it's also looking for the right partner that will help you with this journey and making sure that it's rolled out, that it's being leveraged, and that you get the value that you intended to.
So I think that's a really interesting question. So I think in terms of analyzing, yes, there's a lot of different tools out there, from those that are sitting off of core switches in the the OT networks, that are really analyzing that traffic and identifying assets passively. But I think it's more than that, because I think there's technical architectural challenges that limit that visibility, because the critical components typically, they're not even part of that scope. So I think if we take a step back and look at it truly through the lens of people, process, technology, I think there's a technology element where you need to think about ingesting multiple data sources to have the maximum visibility. And that, Yair, I think that's one thing that I think you guys from a technology platform have done really well. The other thing I'll give you a shout out for that I really think is interesting is just looking at the operational systems through that lens of how an owner operator does, right? So not through the lens of an automation vendor such as Siemens or Rockwell, or a security vendor, because when you think about it from an owner operator, they're thinking of that body form and pier station, right? They're thinking of that skid loader. The reality is these machines might have one or two PLCs in a cabinet, an HMI in the door that's controlling that near that machine, and some drives and IO, right? As a vendor, we tend to think of the asset being the PLC, and that's just simply not the case, right? So I think by number one, when you are talking about how you're going to measure, first of all, understand how you're organizing information. So thinking about it from that site, plant or shop, to that production line, to the machine, so that whether you're looking at the risk of vulnerabilities, you're assigning it to those unit and that hierarchy, because then you can use a really interesting lens of financial metrics, health, safety, environment, right? So for example, just to double click on the financial, what the financial output of that production line is. That data already exists. So you can start to understand what is that risk impacting. So it gives you the opportunity to not just measure risk in a new way with some of these financial and safety metrics, but you can really align with the mission of the business. So hopefully that kind of expanded upon the capability of how do you measure. But I think that was a really good question.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think we have time for one more. So Roger, I'll maybe ask this one of you. What role does compliance play in your OT cybersecurity strategy?
Actually, it plays a very important role, especially sitting here today, looking at the future. Because like I stated earlier, I think it's defining what your program is. What are your in-flight initiatives versus, that security roadmap? And as you have that program, and you're trying to drive that adoption across your industrial facilities, you have to have a vehicle to measure your progress, right? And that is putting together that compliance program. That what are the artifacts that you're going to be looking for? How are you're measuring your existing controls? How are you auditing firewalls and policies and other controls to measure that overall effectiveness, both at the program level, but also at the technical level? This is actually a crucial element to in a staged approach, defining your program, then defining how you're going to audit or measure your program, and then rolling out what that compliance and that reporting period is, because it all comes back to how you're measuring success. And that is the new expectation upon the board and the senior leadership, the investments that have been made in this space. We need to be able to answer these questions. So it's just absolutely crucial today.
Here, any additional perspective on the role that compliance plays?
I think that it's definitely a good starting point. I would say that at the end of the day, I think, you know, when we saw different organizations that are pushing cybersecurity and OT, it's usually been in the best manner when they understand the potential impact, and they're not just doing it to be complied. And I think that the regulations sometimes could be a little bit vague, so there's a lot of room for interpretation. But as Roger mentioned, I do agree. I think that a lot of, especially management, they want to understand how are their, I would say, OT cybersecurity against to what's happening in the market. So compliance or regulations, so standards could be a great place to benchmark against. And also we need to remember there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, those regulations, those standards are out there to support companies and organizations, to give them some guidance, some guidelines, how to look at things, how to prioritize. So I think it's a great starting point. It's a great baseline. It's also a great thing to benchmark against, but definitely not, I would say, where organizations should say, okay, this is only what I care about, because they need to look at it from a broader perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like you said, it's a great foundation to build upon, but you have to be very careful to both manage upwards and downwards in the organization, that this isn't automatically making you secure, and that everybody plays a part in achieving, you know, security or focusing on security. So but yeah, definitely important. And obviously the future, we don't know exactly what it holds, other than we see signs to more regulation and it being an ongoing theme, right? So no, great answers. And ultimately, you know, we're at time, but great discussion today. Roger and Yair, want to thank you for your time. We could go on for a long time just talking about the kind of state of OT cybersecurity, and I'm sure we will on future webinars. To our attendees, we will reach out to follow up. You'll receive an email from OTORIO with the recording and potential next steps. I just want to thank everybody for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.
Thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate it. Real pleasure.
Bye.